Nicholas Hagger is a British poet, educator, and spy who has written a large number of books, and some of them deal with his theory of history and civilisations. And I've written the title of one of them up here: The Fire and the Stones, Grand Unified Theory of World History and Religion, The Vision of God in 25 Civilisations, published in 1991. So this gives you an idea of the kind of problem he sets himself and his approach to it. So for Hagger, civilization is defined by its religion and by its culture and its poetry. So we could say, in short, it's defined by its imaginative vision. And while each civilization has a religion of its own, Hagger says that every religion is ultimately based on the idea of God as light. So this is a very important and fundamental concept for him, that all human religious thought at its base incorporates the idea of God as light. So all religions ultimately have that as their basis, according to him. And so this is a recurring theme of his approach to understanding civilizations, so that when as he would say, the light is strong in a civilization, then the civilization is on the rise, and when the light is weak, then it falls. So we can see that these ideas are expressed somewhat poetically, and it's kind of impressionistic. And you need to read his writing extensively to grasp what he is really meaning by this. But more practically, he divides the progress of a civilization into 61 stages. So Arnold Toynbee had 3 basic stages: growth, breakdown, and disintegration. Quigley expanded that into 7 stages, and Hagger extends it to 61 different stages. But they can be sort of grouped together to some extent. So the stages fall into, more broadly, there's the genesis, the growth, the arrest of growth, so here we're sort of still so far with, most civilization theorists, that there's a Merovingian phase, as Spengler would call it, a coming together of peoples, then the growth phase, and then what Toynbee would call the breakdown, the arrest of growth. It stops growing. But this is where it's peak, flourishing, and then, well, here, as in line with Toynbee, the breakdown, then again, in line with Toynbee, a renewal. There's a bounce. But then the renewal is short-lived and it goes into decline, decay, and its final demise as a civilization. So there is quite a lot of influence of Toynbee's theory on Hagger's ideas. As we've seen, the growth and breakdown phases, and he also recognizes the emergence of a universal state as part of his theory, and as we said, the idea of coming back up again before the final decline. And he identifies, as we've got here, 25 civilisations, which again are mostly based on those of Toynbee, but with a few additions of his own. And his approach is to take these civilisations and show what those 61 stages are in each civilization. And he recognises that his division into 61 stages and 25 civilizations is somewhat arbitrary. That he says, you know, maybe some of those stages could be combined, or even others could be split into different stages. And similarly, the civilizations could be combined or split apart further. So he says he's, you know, not insistent on that it's 61 and 25. But it's just a useful approach to show or as a framework to build the theory around. But it's not necessarily to be taken literally that these are the 61 stages, but it helps him explain the rise and fall, or the processes within each civilization, by breaking it down in that particular way. And so in his books, for each civilization, there's a discussion stage by stage by stage, showing the details of what the genesis, what the growth was, and what the arrest of growth involved in each particular case, and putting dates to them. So supplying, if you like, the data for every civilization to illustrate these 61 stages of the cycle. And Hagger then says that every civilization is defined by what he calls its rainbow parabola, which has, like a rainbow, 7 colours, 7 bands. So let's have a look at that. So as we've seen, for Hagger, light and God as light is a key idea, and light, white light, is divided into the 7 bands of the rainbow. So he divides the character of a civilization into these 7 bands. And what are those? Well, the first band is the idea of the light, which is the central idea. The light of the civilization is the central idea of the civilization. So it's worldview. It's what we said was reflected in its super style. So we can recognize Egyptian sculpture and contrast it with Chinese or Aztec, because each civilization has a different way of looking at the world, and it expresses that in everything it does, but it expresses it in the way it approaches its art, its philosophy, and so it naturally affects how it approaches its sculpture. And so we can see the material manifestation of that worldview, the central idea of the civilization. And then the next band is the alternatives to the light. So each civilization has a central idea, but it also incorporates within itself some alternatives to that. So we saw in other theories, like beginning with that of Danilevsky, emphasis on the necessary diversity of a civilization. It's not a civilization unless it's bigger than just one monolithic worldview or people or culture. It incorporates or it has some internal diversity. So although there is a central idea, there will be for a particular civilization some alternatives to it. So when we're analysing a civilization, we're going to ask what is a central idea, but we're also going to ask ourselves what other ideas are current within this civilization that sometimes challenge that. Then there is the actual religion, institutionalized religion, which embodies the central idea, and this evolves over the course of the civilization. It degenerates into sects. So when the civilization is fragmenting, declining, disintegrating, so does the religion. It degenerates into different sects. The next key idea is the monuments. And this is what he means by the stones. So the book title was The Fire and the Stone. So the fire is the light, and the stones is the monumental architecture of the civilization, whether it's Stonehenge, pyramids, or the medieval cathedral. These are the stones of the civilization, and they're inspired by the light, in other words, by the worldview, and they're eventually destroyed. So because they're key to the civilization. So they're part of what defines it. So when the civilization disappears, the monuments are attacked and destroyed. Then there are the people who make up the civilization, and again, key is that they are heterogeneous. So again, there's that diversity. The civilization brings together different people and incorporates them into one sort of culture area. And they provide the basis of the civilization. They're the sort of raw material that bring together the ideas and the activities that characterize a civilization, and they're eventually responsible for secession later on. So again, when the civilization forms, it brings together these heterogeneous people, and then as it declines, decays, disintegrates, those people separate themselves out again, secede from the civilization. It loses its ability to glue them together, to keep them together. Another key factor that we need to think about when we're considering a civilization and characterizing it is the foreign influences on it. And those include threats. So they can be positive or negative influence to assist it, and threats to threaten it. And those can be military threats, so barbarian raiders. They can also be ideological threats. So that's like foreign cults. So the Roman Empire faced barbarian raiders who crossed the Rhine from Germany and rampaged through Gaul. looting and killing and setting up their own petty kingdoms on Roman territory. So there's a military threat, and but there's also the ideological threat of Christianity, which infused the empire and undermined traditional Roman religion and values and culture ultimately, and really ideologically transformed Rome. So foreign cults, foreign barbarian raiders. So if we were analysing the Roman Empire, we would consider that its interactions with those barbarians from beyond the boundary, what's called the limes of the Roman Empire, the edge of the Roman Empire, and who are and also sources of new ideas that are changing the culture and the central idea of the civilization. And the last aspect is the state, which is secular, not religious. It's the political and economic management of the people making up the civilization. So this manifests itself in, and here he's using Toynbee's ideas, Toynbee's terminology, a universal state or empire. So for Roman civilization, we might tend to associate it with the Roman army, the Roman emperor, the Roman government, the Roman bureaucracy. But that is not all that Roman civilization was. Roman civilization had a central idea. It had a religion. It had monuments that it produced. All these things are also what define Roman civilization, their underlying worldview, not just the mechanics of the Roman Empire. But nevertheless, the mechanics of the Roman Empire are an important part of the civilization that we need to consider, but they're not the whole of it. They're one strand of this rainbow parabola. And these are the things then we need to think about when we're analysing and thinking about a particular civilization and asking what characterises it. And as I mentioned, then his books do this kind of analysis for his 25 civilizations. So, his theory here is impressionistic, poetic, the light, the central idea, but he goes through for 25 civilizations applying these ideas, and that kind of brings out what it is he's trying to do. But up front, it's not necessarily expressed particularly rigorously. And a key idea of his as well is that of universalism, which in this case means that we've seen that the idea of God as light underlies the religions of all civilizations. So it underlies the central idea, or forms the central idea of all civilizations, even though it may manifest itself in different ways. And that also there is a common basis to civilization throughout humanity. And furthermore, we're moving towards a global civilization. Where the entire world settles on a common interpretation of this central idea of and God as light. So for Hagger, history is the same as for Teilhard de Chardin. It's a spiral, or perhaps better we should say a helix. So it has cyclical and linear dimensions or components. So the cyclical is the rise and fall of civilizations through their 61 stages, but the linear motion is the movement towards this convergence on a common religious ideological vision, where, to repeat again, the underlying concept is God as light. So what are we to make of Hagger's theory? Well, it's clearly a mystical sort of theory, and it's also a rather complex theory with its idea of 61 stages of civilization. Perhaps what's good about it is that it encourages us to focus on issues of ideology, as he emphasizes religion, so worldview. And it also brings out the commonality between civilizations. So, for example, for Spengler, each civilization is a thing in its own right. They're completely incommensurable. There's no similarity between them. Whereas for Hagger, although he recognizes that there are distinct civilizations and they are different, he suggests that at the bottom of it all, there is this pan-human or universal idea that he expresses through this concept of God as light that informs their worldview, so that the differences in worldviews of different civilizations are kind of superficial differences, but they all draw upon this common root, this universal pan-human concept. And so according to him, this holds out the possibility that we can move towards a global civilization in which the differences between civilizations and the clashes that result from them will disappear, because those differences are superficial, and ultimately people can all agree on the basic understanding that informs their way of looking at the world.